This is one of the most consequential days in my political career, that today I can hand over keys to citizens of our nation, people who would otherwise have never had a chance at life.
President William Ruto there talking about the housing projects, 1,080 houses, the handover of that, saying this was an important moment of his career. Before we get to the implications on his political career, let's just sort of, have a good lay of the land, so to speak. So, Sam, what is this project? Just sort of give us an overview of what this project is, how many houses, and then we will get to the rest.
Right. So the president announced that he was handing over 1,080 keys to, of course, the equivalence of number of families. And this is a project that has been in the works for quite some time. I think if you recall, when the affordable housing program started with President Uhuru Kenyatta around 2018, and the conversations began. I remember there was an event that the president attended in that area in 2021, and starting off what would have become the construction of over 13,000 housing units in that area. But up until 2022, not much had been done. I remember one of the panelists that we had yesterday on Daybreak was talking about that at the time there's some units that had gone up to the 10th floor of construction. So really there was some progress that was done there. And shortly after coming into the office, President William Ruto went there with the then Cabinet Secretary for Matters Housing, and of course at the same time also playing the responsibility on the Department of Transport, James Macharia. So they were there in October 2022 to see the progress, and of course the President to sort of have an appreciation of the progress that had been made, some of the challenges that are being witnessed, and of course the corrective measures. So the work continued, and this week the president was there to witness, or rather to preside over the process of now handing over these units. So we understand that out of the 13,000 units, you have the 1,080 units ready for occupation, and that's what he was talking about, handing over. But then much of the images that you've seen, and Ben Curie was able to establish that yesterday and today, that out of all those houses, it's only the lady who was featured as moving from his dwelling, now moving with his box that contains his possessions, her possessions rather. That's the only person who has moved into that particular unit, which has more than 200 units going all the way to the 11th floor. You have to give it to the people that have been working on this project, because finally you have something that you can show for it over those years. Since 2018, you are talking about more than 7 years of sorts. But then again, now you start to establish what is the deal, because you're being told that these housing units will have access to water, you have piped gas, you'll have Wi-Fi, you have a lift, and they are talking about that out of the much that you'll be paying on a monthly basis, 1,200 shillings will be for service fee. So if you're in a bed-sitter, if you're in a one-bedroom, or if you're in a two-bedroom house, you have to pay as part of your monthly deductions or contributions that you'll be making. Then part of that is a service fee of 1,200. If you had to look at the math, a bed-sitter is said the price is rated at 640,000 shillings, but then again you pay 3,900 shillings every month, and that's for 30 years. If you had to do the math, that gets you to 1.4 million shillings by the time 30 years are over. But remember that out of that, you have the 1,200 shillings, which is service fee, and has to be paid anyway as long as you are there for the sake of maintenance, especially of the lift and servicing of it. The
common areas, yeah.
Exactly. But now the rent out of a bed-sitter of 3,900, they are saying, the government is saying that it's a figure of 2,700. If you have to calculate it, if it's a rent to own for 30 years, you'll end up paying about more than 900,000 shillings. So there's that. So it's not been very clear on the rate applying, because it looks like it's a mortgage plan, despite it being under the social housing program. Then if you have to talk about a one-bedroom two-bedroom house, the price is 960, but you'll be paying 5,350 shillings per month for 30 years. That's about 64,200 shillings every year. And you pay in total by the end of 30 years, you're talking about 1.92 million shillings. For the two-bedroom house, which is rated at 1.28 million shillings as the price, then the dweller there will be paying 6,800 shillings per month for a period of 30 years. Then you get at 2.4 million shillings. But remember, like I said, you have that figure of service fee. So there are a few questions that have been coming up for people that have been living in the other the informal settlement per se, and the amount of money they have been paying on a monthly basis. Now they move to these new houses. They have to finance that on a monthly basis, but at the same time, you have now to pay for cooking gas. Perhaps they've been using a different source of fuel. You have to pay for water, perhaps at a different rate from what you've been paying, especially if you look at the slum areas, they buy per 20-litre, is it a gallon or mtungi, ordinary mtungi. So there are a few things that are going to be changing for these individuals. But again, you hear that the movement will only happen, the move-in will be on the 1st of June, which is in about a week or so. That's when we will be seeing the remaining 1,079 moving into these particular houses.
I want to understand, because this, at least politically, seemed to be a big deal for the president. By the way, is this the first complete affordable housing project that he has launched in terms of handing over the keys? Would this be the first? Because this seemed consequential to him, yes, for some reason.
I think so, because what he did last year when he was talking about 4,888 units were ready to be bought, he was talking about a situation where people have to now apply for those houses. Remember, there are two programs. There's the social housing program and then the affordable housing program. So affordable housing program appears to be moving slowly for interested Kenyans to come and apply for those houses, and of course to pay the deposit and to service the remaining resources in terms of a mortgage. But yes, handing over the keys, I think this is the first one. Yeah,
which is probably why he was rather happy about it. Let's listen to him, of course, talking about how possible this was.
Mimi nafurahi kwa sababu unajua kuishi nyumba kama hizi watu wote tumeishi kijiji, hiyo mabati, kuna mahali ya choo, lazima ungoje kama ni jioni. Lazima ungoje asubuhi yake ndio uende. Wewe toka nje juu wewe utakutana na nani?
Inawezekana, haiwezekani? Imewezekana, haijawezekana? Watu wametoka kwa slum wameingia estate, hawajaingia. Sinawezekana?
Yes, before we go into the keys, maybe before we come to you, Jamila, you know, he then, I mean, this was a clearly big political moment for him. Let's listen to him talking about the keys that he was handing over.
Today, we are giving you keys, not just to open a door, not just to open a house, but to open a home, to welcoming you into dignity, into a different life.
Jamila.
I think, Yvonne, we talked about how this would mean a lot to the dignity of people who end up getting the houses. And today we listened to the story that was done by Ben Kirui to a lady called Pauline Kariuki, who is the only one who's living in the house now.
Yeah, we heard from her.
We heard from her.
Yes.
Anasema amefurahi, amekuja kuishi hapo. But the government, of course, says that they'd given the residents up to 1st of June to move into the houses. And that's why they're empty. They're doing things to do with gas and Wi-Fi. 1st June sio mbali, tutangoja tuone if by then we'll have the 1,079 other people supposed to move into the houses move in. But even there were some complaints that came from the residents of Mukuru. Several of them were one, that the people who actually got the houses were not people from Mukuru area. There was a lady who was interviewed, and she said that when she looked around, she could actually only recognize about 2 people out of most of the ones who had been given the houses, and she didn't understand who those people were. In fact, she had been at the event there, and a lot of people were unfamiliar. And there were also complaints about there had not been sufficient information about how exactly to register for those houses. About Bomayangu, there were also some of those complaints from residents. Some hawakuelewa sana what they're supposed to do. They want the houses, but they don't know what to do next. But then there are also, Yvonne, those who are asking if this process was transparent, and yeah, of course, was enough information given. But what I found very interesting was what some residents said about the 3,900 they're supposed to pay. Gituku has so graciously explained to us, has broken down, the 3,900. Yeah. They're saying they currently live in a house where they pay 2,000 shillings, and that's what they can afford. So for them, having to move to a house where they'll pay 3,900 is a bit of a challenge. So they say we'd rather live where we are now, where we can afford the 2,000 shillings that we're paying for the bedsitter or the 1 bedroom that we're living in. But of course, now these complaints about people not getting houses or having registered for it or having people who are unfamiliar there, the government was talking about how they're allocating people houses in phases. So they say this particular one was Riara and Mariguini. And that they want people to apply for the next phases, and you'll be on a waiting list and wait and be able to get the houses. But I think for the government, it is very important that this phase is handled very well. Because if there are any questions that come up from what they're saying, that these people are unfamiliar, we don't know them, why is this process not transparent, why was this whole thing not clearly explained to us, this amount is too high for us to be able to afford, because they want to replicate this in other parts of the country, in other places. So this has to go really, really well. So it's the onus is on the government to make sure that they answer all these questions and be able to look at the concerns that are being raised and address them. Because if they don't, then of course that skepticism and that thing of we don't really believe that this is what it is will actually come up. And as you said, and we listened to the president, this is a big deal for him. He wants this to succeed. So I think they need to put in effort to make sure that all these issues that are being raised are sorted out.
Yeah, and you're right. If it's not handled well, then this will be moved from being consequential to inconsequential, or perhaps consequential in a different way for what the president perhaps will consider his legacy. Jay?
Thank you, Yvonne. I think in a sea of promises, these events on Wednesday, well, I think on Tuesday,
Tuesday,
looked more like a soul-to-pole moment for the president. And therefore, that is why I believe he said it was the most consequential day of his political life, because he is a politician par excellence. He knows how to raise the hopes. He knows how to whip the emotions.
Yes.
But then again, we rarely see such a project delivered by a government of the day such as this. And I think we have to give credit to its due, that this project has finally seen the light of day, and it is a good thing. However, just like Jamila explains, there will be need for clarity and consistency in communication of what exactly is going on, how do you access it, how do you pay for it. Because when you look at soundbite, you hear sound bites from a number of people a day after the event, then all these concerns they were raising simply tells you that it was never communicated to them properly. I think for this to remain a consequential moment for President Ruto, then he must now leave the experts to communicate about this. We really need to get the people who understand this project. We really need to understand the people who will break it down so that any other Kenyan can understand what exactly this project entails, what the payment structure looks like, and what the ownership looks like. They should now go over and above the politics and deliver a very consistent messaging on this. Because I can tell you, if you walk out in the streets today and ask people what's the difference between the social housing program and affordable housing programs, very few people will tell you they understand the difference. Yeah. And because this has been a pain point for a number of people, especially those who are earning salaries around pay slip, they really need to find a way of bringing it home such that people actually understand what is going on. Because one of the questions somebody was asking is, why is it that the people who are not contributing for this thing are the first to get the houses. It simply means that in explaining this, in trying to the public to support it, they never really did a good job. Now they have an opportunity to reset. They have an opportunity to come back to the table and explain better what exactly this is, how to access it, where, and who. Because if these building blocks are not done, then I think we will have a number of stories clouding the good project that this is. So the responsibility is actually on the technocrats, the people who are involved in the brick and mortar of this, to deliver a messaging that is going to convince Kenyan that actually this is real, this is happening, and houses are being built and people occupying.
Yeah, and when you speak about, you know, the messaging around what is a big project like this one, and in the full understanding that this was a big moment, of course, you know, the president was there, several local leaders, even those from nearby counties. I think I saw Governor Cecily Mbarire from Embu, the governor of Nairobi was there, naturally. One of the things that would be great to see with the government when you launch a development project is to keep it at the development project level.
That is it.
There was a part of that was then turned into a bit of a political rally. So you had the governor of Nairobi saying, what was it, the kumi bila break, but sasa mewapatia nyumba, sasa mumpatie kura. One of the things we need to learn in this country is when to govern and when to politic, when to govern and when to campaign. Exactly. The very same, you know, government that is castigating the opposition for getting into early campaigns is itself doing that. Now you have a good project, you've launched it, you're saying you're giving dignity to people, leave it at that, give them the dignity and walk away. Exactly. There will be another day to come back to Mukuru and to other areas and say, hey, vote for me. One of the things we should try not to do is say, I've given you this house, now give me your vote. And to use a moment like that for this big sort of campaign rally that becomes something else. So that you keep the solemnity of the moment and to say, this is great, we were doing this for the people as per our mandate and the oath that we took to provide services and make the lives of Kenyans better. Make their lives better and go. Then come with the politics later. But we often conflate the two. And yes, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm idealistic, I know, but this would be a great moment. You know, I'm no politician, so I would imagine, you know, those who
you
like to school me. Yes, exactly. Those who like to school me on politics say you take, you know, a moment with that. But there's just something about it that is in bad taste for me. Like, just do what you are paid to do by the people and go away. And Linus, I can see you smiling.
In the ideal.
I know. Yes, I live in the ideal world, I know.
No, I'm just smiling because I'm watching you wasting the most consequential moment. Your most consequential moment in this show. You may need to know that politics is not the space for humility.
Yeah.
Whether it's the White House or our equally white State House. So in politics, you have to claim the credit and,
and run away with it.
You remember the Iroko tree story, and the lizard that jumped from the Iroko tree to the ground and it praised itself.
Yes.
I did it. By the way, the Iroko tree, for some's benefit, is a very short tree. And President Ruto is obviously very eager to claim credit in this because, let's not forget, this was one of the major promises of his electoral campaign, that we're going to do 250,000 houses every year. So his political promises, actually, some of the big ones are pegged on entirely on this housing project. What continues to be the task for the government and the difficult assignment for President Ruto is to keep selling this idea to the population, because this housing issue is perhaps one of the most divisive issues in his time as president. You have the salaried population that still feels unfairly treated by government when it comes to the housing levy taxation. They see this as entirely a burden whose benefits they can't see. Now, the other thing that should be worrying, I hope we are not dashing into conclusion on this, is if on day 2, only one of the 1,080 houses has been occupied, then is this a question of what happened to the demand? We expected a scrum.
higher demand, yeah.
Was there one?
Well, the optics of the day of the launch were such that we had so many people that had turned up to own houses. But today our team was down on the ground, and when we found one person who have moved in out of 1,080 units that were launched this week. I think that's something that requires some fixing. Is it the handover process that is taking long? Is something not ready? Is it? What is it? Could it be curtains or gas?
No, the keys were handed over.
And the keys were handed over.
To who? Oh, okay.
And let's hope that it doesn't go the same way it went with President Kibaki's slum upgrading project in some areas, where we confirmed through a series of stories that homeowners were not turning up. They instead renting this out as economic units for making money. So in terms of the vision, it has to be really long-term, and a lot of selling has to happen so that the population buys and agrees to this as a worthy vision. Because there's a whole section of the population that still feels, on terms of priorities, we could be jumping the queue.
Sam.
Right, and I think Lina's mentions a very important aspect about the promise of 250,000 affordable housing units every year. And if you recall, that was revised to take care of the market was producing 50,000 units in the country. So the plan then was to have 200,000 units extra by the government. It's been 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years. So we should be at about, if every year takes 200, that will be at half a billion. Sorry, half a million, yeah? I'm thinking in terms of money. 500,000 units should have been completed by now. But if you look at the rate of completion, again, the numbers have not been updated. But as late as last year, the number was 4,888 units. At that time, you were talking about 2 years. So shy of 5,000 out of a target of 400,000, what percentage is that? Right now, you're talking about 150,000 units are under construction. Even if you had to compare that against the target of 500,000 units, what percentage is that? It's about 30%. And at the same time, the government has been collecting housing levy since 2023, disrupted a little bit, then came back in a big way, I believe, at the start of last year. The government talks about that it has 110 billion shillings has been collected from the housing levy. Where is this money going into? Even as we talk about accountability of what the government is able to collect, because you recall the challenge with President Uhuru Kenyatta was that people went to court and opposed the affordable housing levy, and he said, okay, we don't need to collect the levy. We are going to finance the project based on whoever wants to pay some money. And there are people who went ahead to even apply for houses and make their own contributions on a monthly basis. But right now, the president does not have a problem, the government rather, does not have a problem of financing. Why? Because the government is able to collect between 60 and 80 billion shillings, because this is the figure that has been floated by the president himself, but also by members of his cabinet. So if we've been collecting these billions of shillings, what is the challenge? And I think this needs to be explained because the promise was 200,000 units every other year. Why is it that you're lagging behind on that promise when it comes to matters of, because I think initially they were talking about procurement challenges. What exactly is in it? Because you're saying that the plan is to boost the local production In this case, the materials that are required, if it's the grills, window grills that are needed, if it is the doors that are required, you're going to empower the Jua Kali sector. So what exactly is the challenge that you're not able to have this absorption of the resources happening as fast as you'd have expected? Is it a problem of the money is not sufficient? But even then, whatever is available, what is it doing? You realize that despite the launch of 1,880 units that has been done, nobody has spoken about how much did this project cost. If you're talking about 88 apartments in that area of an area of 41.6 acres, how much has it cost to start off with the 88 apartments? How much has it taken so that you can also say that if the cost is this and the selling price is this, how much is government going to realize out of the sale? And when you say that it's the dollars will have to pay over a period of 30 years, how does that look in terms of servicing that program? Because this is a program that will survive the government of President William Ruto. 30 years, if you say that a president serves a maximum of 10 years, you're talking about 3 presidents. If a president serves just 5 years, then you're talking about 6 presidents, if that were to happen. So really, this explanation, we should not wait until the Auditor General tells us in 2 or 3 years from now that Kenyans did not realize value for money. We are talking about situations of other programs that the government has brought forward, and you'll be talking about the Hustlers Fund. If we are not able to move with the programs, we are receiving the money, implementing, but you're not able to report on exactly what is happening for the sake of accountability, it's going to be a problem at the end of the process. At a time that Kenyans who are supposed to be benefiting from these programs, you're not seeing a lot of information flowing in as far as the beneficiaries, how they've been identified, how they are going to service this, especially if you have to look at their livelihoods. How do they earn an income? There are questions that need to be asked, and eventually there has to be value for money, especially when you're talking about taxpayers' resources that many Kenyans have been contributing. Yeah,
and just to add in terms of facts, so you have all this money that you're already collecting, which means you have the money and presumably you have the demand, right?
Right.
Which was the reason for this. And when you take a look at the numbers, it's curiously ironic, because according to the economic survey, apparently, the country's construction sector recorded a decline for the first time in recent years last year. How can that be when you're collecting all of this money? So you have the money available, you've got all of the land that's been availed, and you have the government driving its most ambitious construction project yet, 200,000 houses. So how is it when they're complaining of higher input costs, declining private sector investments? Well, of course, that would be because this is government going into that now, but there's been a slowdown. Last year, the economic slowdown was from 4.7% to 5.7%, and the construction sector was among the hardest hit, shrinking by 0.7%, which is a sharp contrast to a 3% growth recorded in 2023. Now, if 2024 was the year when all of these houses were being built and projects that were being put together, I mean, I think it's rather interesting that you would have figures like these coming out of the economic survey, which, by the way, is a government document. So, you know, this
and also the manufacturing sector has actually been on a decline.
Yes. So which manufacturing, all of those, yes, the producers of all of this, the cement as well, the uptake of that, steel, all of that have gone down. So, you know, there's certain contradictions that just don't make sense. But anyway, in the words of the president, at some point, didn't they change the mantra and said this wasn't about demand for housing, but rather jobs? But then also the jobs didn't rise, you know, in tandem with the rise in construction.
Interesting that you said that. Yeah. Because initially the figure used to hear was about 120,000 jobs.
Yes.
That shot up during the celebrations in December last year. That should have been Jamhuri Day. It shot up to 160,000 jobs. Yeah. Now, the day before yesterday, they had shot up to 250,000.
With the same number of houses we've been talking about, the 200,000.
So well, we keep receiving new figures. Okay. Right now, they're talking about 150,000 jobs. Housing units are under construction. Okay. But the way those figures have been moving, and when you ask directly to officers responsible for such a kind of a department, you never really get answers. And when you get answers, they're contradicting from what the president has been saying. So I think, as a proper way of being accountable to Kenyans. It's just proper to communicate and say, this is what is happening in a manner that can actually be verified. A failure to do that, then we're just floating
and that's
figures.
when you have all those questions that come
and mistrust.
And I think somebody who works closely in this project is mentioning to me that they have actually seen an interest of these projects getting up, that after the Tuesday launch, they saw a registration of about 30,000 more people registering in the Boma Yangu portal, which is commendable. But they must tighten it up and communicate properly. Because when the president talks about all these projects that are going on, and some of them are probably on a tendering stage, that clarity needs to come. When some of them, like Yvonne, you remember the conversation we were having yesterday about a list of more than 50,000 houses that are being tendered for. But you see, when you announce that as if there are projects that are ongoing, then that becomes an issue. So just like we've said previously, tell us about this project, but don't put these figures if you're not sure about them. Because we'll hold you to account based on the figures that you tell us publicly. It is important that they communicate better.
Tumefunga chapter.
Tumefunga.
Vile naona, but I think the one thing that we need to say is what Gituku and Jay are talking about, this communication, this answering questions, just giving us information, this let people know this is where we are, this is what we are doing, this is how to register. You know, because so that when questions come, look at it in terms of people are really interested. They want to know. Take it positively and organize. I mean, if you can go around counties for a whole week and spend money and do all that, you can actually do the same thing and decide that tunaenda kuongea about these houses. I think the will and the intention and whether we want this to work or not are not in tandem with getting the actual work done.
As in kusema na kutenda.
Exactly. For ground mambo iko aje.
All right. So tumalize.
No, tumalize and I think the gentleman in my far right can.
Wow. Wow, Jamie.
Far right.
That's extreme, is it?
Isn't it, right?
Gitu kuanza kuambia substance.